Welcome back to my meditation room, where I'd like to pick up where I left off on stories. Um, I left off on meeting Father Dan Berrigan. Father Dan Berrigan, the anti-war Jesuit priest at Cornell, who introduced me to Swami Satchidananda, who Susan worked for, the Appalachian Poverty Project I told you about. And I wanted to tell you another story. So he had a major influence on us. This was in the 60s, late 60s, the Vietnam War, students demonstrating against the Vietnam War on our campus, on campuses all over the country. And there was a huge march on Washington in October of 1969. And Cornell sent like 5,000 out of 12,000 students all went to Washington that day. Father Dan Berrigan was an organizer of the Cornell contingency. I learned so much about Vietnam from Dan Berrigan that Susan and I went. We went the night before. We stayed with Susan's cousin. And on the news that night, President Nixon came on and said he'd like to hear what the students have to say. It was the 6:30 p.m. National News. And I said to myself, if he wants to know what the students have to say, I'm going to tell him. I had learned all the facts from Dan Berrigan. I was prepared. I did not understand our involvement. It made absolutely no sense. And I thought to myself, tomorrow morning when we go to the march, Susan, we're going to the White House. We're going to knock on the door and say, President Nixon wants to hear from us. And that night, I visualized all night my speech, what I was going to do. Being in the White House, I wasn't going to be intimidated by the seal or the artifacts. I wanted to get my points across. I rehearsed my speech all night long. I barely slept. I thought I would meet up with my roommate, who I knew would go in with me. And the next day, I was overwhelmed. My visualization, I thought I would just go up to the White House. There were 500,000 people there. There was no way to find my roommate. It was a madhouse. But I was still determined. And I said to Susan, I can't find Tommy. Let's go anyway. And what happened was that all of a sudden we're in the midst of this throng of people. It's a wave moving towards the White House, towards the lawn that everyone was going to demonstrate on. And we're walking, we're caught up in it. And in the middle of this crowd, a man in a jacket and tie is standing there. Everyone's walking around him. He's maybe walking upstream or just standing there. And he walked right up to me in the middle of all these people and said, would you like to go into the White House? The next thing I knew, Susan and I were checking our bologna sandwich, which is, we weren't vegetarian yet, at the security. We're being taken down the halls of the White House. It's 95 degrees outside. The White House is air conditioned. And we end up in the office of a man by the name of Chuck Colson. He was one of the Watergate defendants. Ehrlichman and Haldeman, these were Nixon's highest advisors. And we ended up in a meeting for the next 2 hours. There were only 4 students. And they told me that Nixon was going to come in. Honestly, he never did come in. The seal was there. Everything I visualized the night before, I gave my entire speech. I will tell you this, I was incredibly disillusioned. I knew so much more than they did, and they're the ones running this war. It was upsetting. It was very disillusioning. I wrote a letter to Chuck Colson afterwards, reiterating my points and my suggestions. He wrote me back a letter on White House stationery that I still have. And the last postscript to this story is that I took a batch, a matchbox, the pack of matches that was sitting on the table, and it was white, and embossed on it was the president's house in gold. And I took them, and the rest of that semester, that year, I took them back to our roommates. Understand this was the late 60s, and I would simply tell you that those matches were used for nothing except lighting joints. I hope you know what that is. Not something I got overly involved in, but it was the 60s, and we enjoyed lighting them with matches from the president's house. A story on visualization. I feel like I had a neon sign over my head saying, "Take me in." That was illuminated from all the visualization I did that night. Have a great day. Blessings to all.